everyone. Thank you for gathering today. We are really excited to talk about Blue Horizon, as in what is happening in the water in your own backyard. Right now, I have really wonderful special guests, but before we talk about the special guests, and I will introduce all of them, I want to remind you that terms change. And with terms changing, so does opportunity changes. As an example, blue economy was a term that is recently now housed under the penumbra of climate tech. And what ushered that kind of change in was actually some of the frameworks of recent policy. As an example, Mass Leads Act is one that has recently said blue tech is right underneath climate tech. So with those kind of changes, we need to embrace the fact that as terms change, words really dictate where climate, where projects, where money, and where all of our attention should be delivered. And speaking about those deliveries, we're with really wonderful guests here. I'll get out of the way. The most important one, myself. Hi, I'm Vic Innocent of Frankenbuild Ventures. Our tagline is that we support hardware and hardware-enabled AI of climate tech. And then we have Nadir Out-Lucin. He is Vice President of Programs and Platform of See Ahead. We also have Bruce Carlisle, right to my left, Managing Director of the Offshore Wind and Mass CEC. We also have Jennifer Downing, Executive Director of New Bedford Ocean Cluster. And we also have Judith Underwood, CEO and co-founder of Boston's own Blue Innovation Labs. So thank you so much for gathering to hear all of our conversations. And at the very end, you'll even get to bother some of them as well. So with that, I'll start with a first question. All right, so Massachusetts has long led in biotech and clean energy, and you guys all know that. But what's uniquely positioned about coastal regions like New Bedford and Boston? Well, let's talk about it. What makes us lead in the blue economy? And where are we still fragmented in terms of ecosystem building across municipalities, across agencies, and across the ports? So with that question, I'll start off with Bruce, actually.
Great. Thanks, Vic.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody, for being here today. So we are the nation's Bay State, right? So the ocean is really an integral part of sort of how we define ourselves, both in the past, in the present, and of course, the future. In terms of blue economy, our partners at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, we'll talk about them in a little bit, sort of define it as a number of different sort of sectors. In Massachusetts, in particular, commercial fishing, maritime trade and transport, tourism and recreation are some of the sort of big historical economic drivers with a lot of sort of cultural significance. But we also have some sort of new emerging sectors, ocean renewable energy, offshore wind, which I will also talk about, ocean robotics, marine sensors, and other ocean climate tech. In Massachusetts, the blue economy is an $8.3 billion additive to our gross domestic product. It engages about 6,000 businesses, employing more than 85,000 folks. So it's a big deal for us. And ocean tech globally represents a massive opportunity. About 70 billion sort of by 2030, and that doesn't account for AI. Vic mentioned Mass Leads, and I do want to highlight that. Hopefully you've heard something about it, and hopefully you've also heard about the state's Climate Tech Economic Development Plan. Really important tool for us and for Mass CEC. It's going to help sort of guide our work in supporting the ecosystem, which obviously includes startups and businesses in the space, but partners like we have up here on the stage. And I do want to emphasize that ocean tech is definitely part of climate tech. And at Mass CEC, We're rolling out a new initiative. It's the Ocean Innovation Network. We're going to be supporting folks in the ecosystem, and stay tuned to this space for future opportunities.
Awesome, thank you. And since you had also in your answer mentioned wind, I'd love to bounce this also to Jen.
Thanks. So I'm coming from New Bedford, Massachusetts, and so the port in New Bedford has really been an economic engine for not just New Bedford in the region, but much, much further across the state, and I'd say even the U.S. For 23 consecutive years, we've been the highest grossing commercial fishing port in the United States. And so our strategy around economic development and port development in New Bedford has really been to lean into what we know is our strengths, which is our traditional maritime industrial industries like commercial fishing. And by leaning into that and leveraging those strengths and then connecting that to opportunities around innovations and new industries like offshore wind. So we've known for quite some time that we had a lot of competitive advantages in that space. And so working with state partners like Mass CEC, we've been able to upgrade our port infrastructure. We have a seafaring workforce in New Bedford. We knew a long time ago that with proper training and upskilling, these workers could move into these clean energy careers. So working on putting those workforce development programs into place. And I think looking into the future around blue tech, we feel like we're in an advantageous position around supporting startups with the testing and de-risking and commercialization of their technologies. And this is all, not to say anchored, but truly anchored in the foundation of our port economy. We think we're very uniquely positioned. We've demonstrated that success, I think, with the offshore wind industry. And while things are changing federally, we're continuing to look ahead. And we're looking ahead to the promise and opportunity around technology development.
Brilliant. I really appreciate that you mentioned the career development angle. I recently was at a national security conference, and we talked ad nauseum about how all of the innovation is really coming from the youth who is innovating on their own careers and why they're doing it. So with that, I'd love to also move over to supporting you individually through career development, but also I understand that DEI is kind of a dirty word. We just mentioned that there's lots of changes happening in the government, and yet we're still going to move forward in supporting climate tech in particular. So with this as example, today we're talking about all communities that have historically been left out of climate. So how are you making sure coastal workforce development reaches everyone? Because this is really the human side of that infrastructure that you guys just mentioned. With that, I would like to bounce this off to Judith, actually.
Thank you for that question. So in the workforce side, so we're located on Boston Harbor in Chelsea, and we've been in contact with the schools, the community college, the local universities about creating a workforce development program very similar to what they are doing in New Bedford, which is awesome. Bristol Community College, I love their programming. We're very focused on that. We're focused on taking high school, middle school kids, doing finance literacy for entrepreneurship with organizations like Frankenbuild Ventures. And for the Blue Institute, our nonprofit, to create early STEM programs for these students and to have them paired up with startups that are working with Blue Innovation Labs to do internships. And I get kind of angry with that DEI being dead. Let me say that diversity and innovation is essential. Why is it essential? You have to have every different type of thought and different cultures coming in together to really create the best innovation that you can. And I know both See Ahead and R2, we have an incubator program, a 1 to 3 year incubator program, and an accelerator program. We've worked with about 70, and I think same number of startups. We both push very hard on having a very diverse group of startups, and it works.
Brilliant. And since you mentioned internship, there's also a great internship over at See Ahead. So Nadir, would you like to give some comments?
Yeah, absolutely happy to. At See Ahead, one of the things we identified is really that to really have an impact within the blue economy, you need to look across sort of a wide range, and especially this morning there were some conversations around the role of AI, and we see the role of AI is pretty massive in the blue economy. We're going to talk about this a little bit later on. And some of our earlier startups have actually crossed over, if you will, from other spaces. They would do something in workforce training on land-based systems and then saw that there were some just as good, if not better, opportunities to do this on ocean-based system, specifically offshore wind, right? So one of the things that we worked on about 2 years ago, and we're actually launching it again this year, is what we call the Bridge to Blue Tech program. And this is a program that's been funded in a way by the SBA. We've modeled a lot of it on the Mass CEC internship program, downright to even the offer letters and everything. So, great model to be able to reuse. But the program itself is really meant to match students from various universities in the region directly with startups, right? And the idea is to really get them to work practically on startups, because as we like to talk about, when you have a startup of like 2 or 3 people, as an intern, you're not going out to get the coffee, you're actually going out to build the code that is going to build the technology, right? And it's the most sort of transformative. So we currently work with UMass Boston on the program for the recruitment. We've taken from students from across. Actually, after this, I have to sign a lot of offer letters and acceptance letters into the program. So we're really excited about that, and we're really excited to sort of launch this another year.
Thank you. As you can see, this kind of education happens no matter how old you are, whether you're coming in from elementary, you're going into graduate school, or like many of you guys are founders along the entire spectrum, including into your 50s and 60s, right? So considering that, we're in Massachusetts, and MA has a number of incredibly innovative and timely projects, especially ones that involve stakeholders at multiple levels. So from port retrofits to subsea cables and turbines. As such, what elements, programs, policies are you guys seeing? As an example, you mentioned supply chain coordination, so let's talk about economy deployment. And I'll also say what policy levels are specifically the most urgent ones that we should be fixing. With that one, I will start off with Bruce.
Great, yeah. So thanks for the question. We've got sort of offshore wind as a bit of a theme here within the blue economy, ocean renewable energy, and something that's really, really important to the Commonwealth and our energy and climate future. It's really important to a lot of other East and West Coast states. And quite frankly, from a sort of national perspective, really important for our sort of energy security and quite frankly for our escalating load demand. So I'll sort of use offshore wind as my example. It's a mature industry globally, UK, Europe, other parts of the globe, about 70 gigawatts installed capacity, and we're just getting going here in the US. We've got projects we're building, mostly, and I'll get to that. But in the U.S., we're going to need some support to be able to develop the infrastructure, the supply chain, the workforce that we need to get this industry on its feet. And we've, at Mass CEC, very proud of our involvement and support of the industry. We helped develop the nation's first offshore wind specific marshalling port down in New Bedford. Jen mentioned it, and right now home to Vineyard Wind 1, installing Massachusetts' first commercial scale project, but other investments through a Ports Challenge competitive grant opportunity that we ran. We're doing other ports in New Bedford. We're doing Port of Salem, offshore wind terminal, and ports in Somerset. We're also investing in workforce, literally dozens of partners who are helping to develop and run folks through really important health, safety, technical training, credentialing that's required for them to go down to the waterfront and offshore. Partners like Mass Maritime, we heard about Bristol Community College and the NAUI, many, many, many others. I could go on. but I won't. But we're also helping to invest in the applied research and science and data analysis. That's really, really, really important to do responsible development, to fill critical gaps, and work across a number of different partners, whether it's our federal partners, our state partners, our NGOs, our developers, and many others. So all that's positive. What's been a real drag on the blue economy is the new federal administration. And I'm sure you guys have talked about it. It's kind of depressing, but we do have to talk about it. Certainly for offshore wind, moratorium and other actions have severely sort of curtailed and put a huge area of sort of fog on it. But, you know, I mentioned before, decimating federal agencies like National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, our ocean and coastal experts, and by the way, the National Weather Service, basically divesting from science and research. So these are massive impacts. They will have far-reaching and unfortunately probably some lasting impacts. So what we have to do is essentially, you know, keep our eyes on the prize. In Massachusetts, we're committed to ocean tech, the blue economy, offshore wind. We're going to continue to do that, and we're going to do that with all of you. We're going to just sort of ride this out a little bit and get ourselves in a position for when things get a little bit better, we're going to make some hay.
Thank you for that, especially since Mass CAC, See Ahead, New Bedford Ocean Cluster, and Blue Innovation Labs are all staying the course no matter what. So it's really important we hear that. But as you had mentioned some of these pitfalls, let's also talk about on the other side. You guys are enabling and making sure that the infrastructure is there. So let's talk a little bit more about gaps at the port side. So Judith, do you have?
So we're seeing a lot of opportunity for startups that are using AI and machine learning to support the ports around the country with security, with any kind of barnacles that come from places and are bringing different things on the ships, right? And
biofouling.
Biofouling and also desalination. One of our startups is actually here in the audience. It's, where are you? Harmony Desalination, thank you. Hello. Quantum Way is a PhD from MIT, and he spun out his dissertation into a really cool startup, catch him afterwards, working on desalination of water and can make energy. And this is actually very important for our future, particularly with the science being decimated. I live out on Cape Cod. I've lived out there for 25 years, and we see the encroachment. And also in the South Coast, I know it's there as well. Port infrastructure, going back to that, also in Salem, the Port of Salem, they're working very hard to get that set up. I'm staying upbeat about wind, in part because Europe is pushing very strong, and I think we can do a lot here in Massachusetts to prepare for the next administration, whoever that will be, and rolling out the offshore wind industry because we need it. We need it.
Yeah, and I'll just add, 3 years ago when I came into my position, when we launched the New Bedford Ocean Cluster, we launched a pilot program with Vineyard Wind called Act Local to localize the industry, to really make sure that we could capture the opportunity around offshore wind, to literally match, make, and connect the experienced offshore wind industry companies with local providers on the ground. And it was like stepping on a moving train, right? We were chasing those jobs and trying to just catch up constantly. We had a lot of successes and success stories to tell. But I look at this opportunity, and thank goodness we're in Massachusetts. And this is where Massachusetts can lead, is while other states are backing away, we need to continue to lean in and get our supply chain ready, get our workforce ready, start to get startups that are contributing great technology to the offshore wind industry, starting to move through that commercialization pipeline so that we are ahead. So it's easy to get, you know, into the doom and gloom, but I think we have to really see this as an opportunity to continue to lead, because Massachusetts was the leader in offshore wind when it came to the US industry. So we can continue in that position if we think strategically now, during this downtime, if you will.
Downtime. Nadir?
Yeah, I mean, adding to what everybody is saying, I think, you know, so we look across the entirety of the blue economy, not just one vertical or another, and support across the entirety of it. And when you look at the ecosystem in Massachusetts, it's as Bruce touched on, long history, and as Jen touched on also, like a lot of track record in the industry across the board, and we see this as a great opportunity across that exists, right? I think one of the things that Massachusetts does extremely well that we hear from the startups is how well connected the ecosystem is and the pathway for startups, right, to get started. I think Mass CEC does a phenomenal job on that front. I think things like, you know, the business front door, which, you know, for our programs, for example, you have to be a US company to be able to operate within our programs. You also, to be able to really engage in the Massachusetts ecosystem, you have to be a Massachusetts-based organization to be able to take advantage, right? But I think the business front door effort that's going on at the state level helps with that, because now it's making it a little bit easier for companies to get in. I think what we're seeing as gaps, if you will, right, is we are very focused on the commercialization journey of startups, right? Because we think, and we might talk about this, we see that there's a lot of startups coming into the space. And that's a great indicator to the market because it's showing that there's actually, you know, a supply, if you will, that's coming in, right? We're seeing that there's signals of demand, which is also great to see. You know, we saw this in the offshore wind industry. We're seeing it in a few other verticals. I think the question becomes, how do you continue to push companies along, right? It's not good enough that we have great startups. We need more companies to get to a commercialization scale, more companies to have their first paying customer, and it can't be just, you know, a small project. It has to be of a massive scale so they can send a signal. Many of the industries that we operate in have, you know, a dozen major, you know, prime customers, right? And then have, you know, a lot of like support customers or end users in that space. So that's one of the things we're very focused on, and you know, I think Massachusetts is trying to do a lot in that front, but there's a lot more that we need to do.
Thank you for that. And in fact, I'll even add on as well, from the perspective of investors, we're also seeing how companies are staying the course. They want to continue on commercialization, but they need the discussions happening very, very early on, even at inception, to say, hey, are there programs that would help usher me along? Should I even start this journey in order to do that? So I appreciate you adding that one on.
And they need to get in the water. They absolutely need to get in the water and be able to tweak things right at the
Second
thing.
that. And Mass CEC did some great research around this that we're all benefiting from, is hearing from startups what they need. They need that easy access to salt water, and they need the threshold to be low, and they need it to be affordable, and they need partners on the ground that are willing to embrace them being in that space and supporting them to do so. So second that.
Yeah.
Can I say one more quick thing
Yeah,
about
absolutely.
Massachusetts in general? Sometimes when we think about the blue economy, we only think that it's right along the shore, right? So that it's only the coastal towns are benefiting, coastal cities, but that's so not true. There is a vibrant biotech industry throughout Massachusetts. In the blue space, in the ocean space, bio-ocean, bio-blue is emerging at a rapid scale. And it's an opportunity to connect the hardware that's going out and finding these things with the bio. I mean, I grew up in Worcester, so we often joke about bringing Worcester back as a major port, and we can do it through the blue economy. You laugh, but and also Western Massachusetts, I don't know if you know, but it has been for a long time a corridor of innovation and also fine machining that supports the Navy down in Connecticut. And the startups, particularly that we work with and SIAHEAD works with, can really access those facilities and the different incubators that are around the state when they need more space. So it's expensive to stay in the Boston area, right?
Thank you. All right, with that, I'll actually switch streams a little bit. Streams. And that was actually not on purpose.
So many puns.
Let's switch streams a little bit and also talk about data sovereignty and measuring in water. Judith just mentioned, like, you guys need to actually get in the water and tissues. You need to actually get into the water. And with getting into the water, for me as an investor, I'm also thinking, what are you guys getting into the water for? You know, are you just deploying a buoy, or is your product also generating data as well? So this talks about data sovereignty and the discussion about how ocean-based industries generate ginormous amounts of data, you know, from underwater mapping to turbine telemetry. So let's talk about who owns that data and how are we actually preparing for the governance challenges of a digital ocean. So with that one, I want to ask Nadir, do you want to start that one off?
Sure. I think the question of data ownership is still one that needs to be defined and determined. I think one of the things that's particularly challenging within the ocean space is that a lot of the public funded, especially at the federal level, programs require full data transparency and data sharing, right? And often for a startup, that's pretty challenging because A, because it's part of the R&D that they're doing, B, because that might be part of their IP, and thinking about how to challenge it. It doesn't mean that it's a zero, like a 0-1 kind of answer. There has to be an answer in between there. I think Bruce touched on, you know, everything that's happening at the federal level right now, right? And we know that there's been, you know, data sets that are gone away or have been put on other systems, right? And I think when you go to a question around, you know, I'm going to mix a couple of things here together, but when you start talking about sovereignty, you know, both at the state level and a national level, that's a massive issue, right? And I think we look at it from the perspective of, you know, the rest of the world, and Massachusetts, you know, benchmarks itself, you know, competitively across the globe. The rest of the world is not stopping. We know that in Europe, for example, offshore wind is growing. The UK is going to be doubling production, right? And so there is going to be more startups, more data coming through from that space, right? So that's something where we see that there's an opportunity to actually lean in and to go in and to have those conversations about what, you know, how do we think about the data sets that get created. I think Massachusetts has a massive play in that conversation, given that we have so many blue industries that are generating so much data on their own right. Through our programs, you know, we've seen some really interesting sort of stories there. We've seen some companies that are doing, you know, translation, if you will, from other verticals into the ocean space and bringing some of that thinking. We often talk about, you know, movies that we've seen in other industries. Like, for example, we've seen this either as in fintech or we've seen it in the financial services, and how they're starting to play themselves into the ocean space. And that is quite exciting because now, you know, we kind of know what those roadmaps are for the evolution. We've seen it in banking, we've seen it in real estate, we've seen it in a bunch of other places. So we can help the startups with that. We do see, though, that there are increasingly more companies that are very similar to one another in the space. And that's both a good indicator that there's more demand, but also it's forcing these companies, especially if there isn't a commercial partner sort of at the end of the stream to sort of draw them in, to start to think about how do they differentiate themselves? How do they grow? How do they scale, right? All those questions, right? And so, you know, we are in the process of formalizing what a piloting program starts to look like for companies, because it's a great way to test that out, right? And you know, one of the things that Massachusetts is really good at, has a rich history in, is having, you know, so many ports, so much expertise, so much, you know, know-how across the board. And that's so easy to tap into because we have a very vibrant, you know, well-connected ecosystem. And the way we look at it is, we don't have to develop necessarily the expertise of how to get stuff in the water. We need to make sure that we're working with people who have the expertise in getting how to get stuff in the water. So we see this as a massive opportunity just because of it's the data space. There's a massive opportunity to do things with it, but also it's a great opportunity for those of us in Massachusetts to keep the conversation going.
And that's a great segue to remind us all that this is still also in the world of public-private partnerships, whether this is in the commercial space or, as Bruce had mentioned earlier, with government agencies such as NOAA and beyond, which realistically have been decimated, but they still exist, and so their contribution to discussions on data will still be relevant. With that, we do have just about 2 minutes. Actually, no, I'm lying. That is fine. You will be able to ask questions of any of our panelists very quickly, right up to the side. And so to keep on timing, I want to say thank you so much for attending this talk. It's an ongoing journey for us both. And thank you for your time.